Good morning. My name is Heather Fisher, Chair of the Historic Preservation Commission. I call this meeting to order. It is August 15th, 2023 at 8 a.m. The first item on the agenda is the approval of meeting minutes from July 18th, 2023. Any comments or questions?
I'll move approval.
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, same sign. All right, motion approved. Second item on the agenda is the review of historic overlay district 1345 4th Avenue South and Jefferson Historic Overlay. And Brad, do you want to comment?
Good morning, Commissioners. Brad Garcia with the Department of Planning and Development. Our case today is, as mentioned, 1345 4th Avenue South. It's in our core neighborhoods, specifically the Jefferson neighborhood. And this is continued from last month's meeting. It's a request to demo the existing single-family structure. And the owner of that is the Land Trust, I'm sorry. And Trenton is here with us today just to kind of talk about the further findings that the commissioner had found from between last meeting and today. Again, the overlay, as mentioned, there we go. For demolition, again, it's up to your commission to be able to review the criteria based on the applicant's application and to justify whether that demolition is valid. And again, the blight report that the applicant had provided hasn't changed. The exterior photos and the interior photos that they had provided are in your packet. Again, those haven't changed from the previous. What has been added was the foundation photos. And then those again are in your packet for review, but we can scroll through some of these as well. And yeah, I think it's pending any other questions. Again, Trenton's here to answer any other thoughts or concerns that you might have.
Thank you, Brad.
Mm-hmm.
I'll open it up for questions or comments.
Well, I guess I would state that three of us went and looked at the house, and we crawled down into the crawl space and we took a good look at what's going on down there structurally. It was a lot of confusing items down there. But having inspected the house myself, at the last meeting, I thought, oh, this house isn't all that bad, but having viewed it myself, I can see why the need for replacement is there.
Great. Any other comments? Yeah, I would verify that finally getting into that crawl space, it was apparent that the structure was definitely unsound, and amazed that it's still standing, frankly. Is there a
Well, I will
motion?
move then, I'll make a motion to approve the application to demolish the house.
I would second that.
All right, all those in favor, say aye.
Can I just say something first?
Yes,
Before we vote? That when this kind of an issue comes before this commission, and I've said this sort of thing before, but everybody loses. First of all, the house loses. You know, a house made with old growth timber and good woodwork and so on, at least it was. A family loses who could have lived in this house for many years and made it a home. The core neighborhood loses because a historic house will be gone and replaced with something that is only superficially contextual with the neighborhood, I presume. And so the historic context and the historic overlay district in Fargo loses because it loses a historic house. The city of Fargo loses because when there are many houses like this that are in poor condition, the city's reputation suffers as a place that people seem not to care about, which is not true. And finally, the land trust loses because they have to demolish a house rather than buy an empty lot and build something without paying the demolition costs. So I just wanted to state how unfortunate it is when cases like this come before this commission.
Thank you for that. Any other comments? All right. All those in favor for demolition, say aye.
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 Those opposed, same sign. Motion is approved. Thank you, Trent. Any other business?
I would like to bring up something before we depart this morning, and I'll try to keep it short. But I'm still a little bit concerned about something that happened earlier this year. And this is in regard to the Loomis property at 101 9th Street South, a historic property that was, according to the newspaper article, predates 1884. They couldn't pin an exact date on it. But there was a day back in February or late February, early March, when I was going to the courthouse on some work-related matters, not personal. And I could not get down the street, and it was all blocked off. And I thought, I wonder what's going on. So I had to go around the other side, and I saw on the backside of the Loomis building the equipment necessary to demolish a building. And I thought, how can that be? How can a historic building in a adjacent downtown neighborhood be demolished with no public comment at all? So,
Not in an overlay.
yeah, it's not in an overlay. So then I started to think about what is my responsibility on this commission as it relates to something like that. And when I went back to the responsibilities that are outlined for the commission on the web page, two of the three we do on a routine basis, one of which we just did today, which is retaining and enhancing historic properties while allowing their adoption for current use. One is assuring new construction complies. But the one that is listed as number one that I think really applies to the Loomis is identifying, evaluating, and designating properties significant in the history, architecture, engineering, and culture of the community, state, and nation. And it does not say anything about being in a historic overlay. It says a historic property. And so I thought, well, what's the definition of a historic property? And so I went to our Jefferson neighborhood overlay, and we defined a historic property as anything that predates 1940. This building, 1884 or older. I went to the Erskine's overlay. They define a historic property as anything predating 1945. And that overlay was adopted in 2005. So that was 18 years ago. So maybe that could be adjusted also. Maybe that could be, because, you know, however old the oldest property was when they adopted that in 2005, everything else is now 18 years older. So what used to be historic, that's probably, that bar has shifted. So when I look at the Island Park overlay, it doesn't designate a specific time frame other than it says it includes properties constructed between 1880 and 1920. So it doesn't say it's limited to properties constructed between 1880 and 1920, but it includes properties in that time frame. So I guess what I'm looking for, I know that there is, if you go to the city website, there is a database of 400 historic properties in downtown. And so we know that those exist. Yet if someone goes to pull a building permit for a property that's already on a historic list, not within an overlay, but within a list, nobody comes to this meeting to tell us what they're going to do. I've never seen Kilbourne here, and I like what Kilbourne does. I think they do great work. I've never seen any property owners downtown that have historic properties that are listed on the city's list come to us and talk to us about what they want to do.
Oh, that's happened.
And so if we're just going to limit ourselves to what happens within the historic overlays, I think we're only doing a part of our job. And if we're going to really designate our authority on historic properties, I think we need to define what that is. And maybe with the new land development code that's coming up, maybe that's an opportunity to go back to those overlays and gain some consistency so that, you know, one neighborhood's property isn't historic while right across the street, because they have a 5-year differential between their historic designation, that property is not historic. So it breaks my heart to see a building like the Loomis, which had on the second floor, right around the time of North Dakota statehood, the land grant office that granted land to settlers in the state of North Dakota was in that building. And it just got torn down without a whimper. And it seems to me like, as a commissioner, that I did not do a very good job on that. So I don't know what direction to take that. I don't have a motion to make, but I would just ask you to consider if we should expand our responsibilities, or at least take a look at that first bullet point for our responsibilities and see how we can do a more aggressive approach to that. So.
You know, Jay, following up on your comment, almost the entire downtown Fargo is listed on the National Register of Historic Places. But there are no protections whatever for doing anything downtown unless federal funds are involved. And so something done to any building downtown, in downtown Fargo, would never come to this commission, even though it's on the National Register of Historic Places. And there are other examples also in Fargo that it's unfortunate that our specific charge in the city's ordinance only has to do with the city designated historic overlay districts.
I would respectfully disagree. That's not what it says on the website. We're not limited to that.
Well, with respect to our, I don't know what you want to call it, teeth, or, I mean, we're relatively benign.
This is exactly what it says. I copied and pasted it from the website this morning. Commission responsibilities: identifying, evaluating, designating properties significant in the history, architecture, engineering, and culture of the community, state, and nation. So it doesn't say anything about historic overlay. And the city of Fargo, you know, when I think about it, has a list of 400 properties downtown that they consider historic. So they've already been identified. And theoretically, they've been evaluated. And so why don't they come before this commission? Why are we limited to such a small percentage of the property stock in the city of Fargo, where neighborhoods have voluntarily, we're preaching to the choir. My neighborhood, we actually went out and established a historic overlay on ourselves because we wanted to protect the neighborhood. So we're the choir. You're preaching to us. It's the people that are outside of those districts that really need the benefit of the expertise of this board.
I think maybe going back to Paul's comment, I think in terms of national precedents between the city, the state, the federal government, I would say it's been somewhat of a status quo that if there are federal funds, you know, there's a protocol, right, to go through. If it's CDL, or if there's federal funds that have trickled through the state, if there's somewhat of a stop hold. We're just in this,
Block grant money.
there's block grant money, right? There's certain stipulations. However, I think the comment that you're making, it's definitely valid, but it goes back to the city of maybe widening the scope of what this commission does and how we review it. And I would maybe turn it back to Brad or even Megan if you had further comments.
I'm going to go back to the comment that you made about everybody loses. And because I drive past the Loomis vacant lot on a daily basis, the Loomis lost because it wasn't on any kind of a federal registry. It didn't have any community block grants. It didn't have all the I's dotted and the T's crossed. But one of the most historic commercial buildings in the city of Fargo, and likely one of the oldest, because it predates the Great Fire, got torn down in a matter of 3 days without a whimper. And I would encourage you to go back and read the Forum News story about it, about the history of the building. It's a real loss. And I think it's the kind of thing that we could prevent if we were a little bit more conscious of what's out there for. Someone at the city issued a demolition permit for a historic building. Now, they're probably not thinking this through the same lens that I'm thinking. They're thinking, I got a line of people here asking for permits, and they want to get a demolition permit, write a check, and here's a property address, and they're not thinking, I wonder if this is a historic property. But some way, somehow, we have to make those people more conscious of the fact that maybe we hit the pause button. Maybe we are just as concerned about the Loomis building as we are about the guy on my block putting a new porch on his house. Because there's more gravity towards that Loomis building and what could happen there. So I'm just saying that we can think more broadly than just the historic overlay districts, in my opinion. And we're granted that authority, according to what I see, so. But I don't have time to drive around town and figure out which are the historic properties.
I think your
We need a
comment
list.
that the city, though, has to be more aware of it. It's somewhat depends on the city employee, because if it's their charge to issue permits, it's their charge to issue permits. If it is within lines for the outlines of what they can do, then they can do it. They're following the correct protocol. We just need to make sure that those properties are identified and put into some protections, if that's the case. And what that is, I don't know, but I think that's the conversation to have with the city at this time, and identify those things if there is a.
Apparently, there is a protocol right now if you pull a building permit for a property in a historic overlay.
Right.
So they've built that into the protocol system. So can they build something in that states any property prior to 1940, if you pull a permit for, that we're going to red flag that? I don't want to slow down progress. I get it. But at the same time, we need to be more conscious of what's happening outside of the historic overlay, because I think we have authority there, and I don't think we're using it.
I guess that it's a continuous slope in a way, because like you're saying, in 18 years, things have changed, and now there are buildings that are 18 years older, and they're potentially historic. I have a certain affinity for the turn of the century buildings, or not turn, mid-century buildings. I would like them to be a historic protection over those, but we're not there yet. So again, it's a continued conversation that we have to have with the city and the community, because as much as we have power, it needs to be the community that wants to retain this and build it up as a place you want to be.
Well, I think, Paul, during your short-lived tenure as the president of the Fargo-Moorhead Heritage Society, one of the things that you brought up was sharpening the profile of historic preservation within the community. And I think that's exactly what we're talking about. If it's to get community support or to get the support of the municipality, maybe that's some behind the scenes work for our Preservation Commission to do before we make a motion.
You know, it seems to me that when we talk about the ability to enforce something, that it really depends on what is stated in the Land Development Code. Brad, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but then it seems to me that the step that needs to be taken is for the Land Development Code, when that is revised, to take historic properties into much more account than the current code does.
Right, yeah, these are definitely good comments and good discussion, commissioners. I can confirm that the current policy or the process is for historic overlay review is that it is only in a historic overlay. We do have calls and questions about historic properties that are actually on the National Register list, or we get a lot of inquiries on if a property is on the National Inquiry List. So I think there's more awareness that's coming within the communities as far as valuing historic properties. Unfortunately, some properties, there's no blanket process to capture everything. But again, I do believe that there is value and that folks are looking into that and value that. As far as the Land Development Code rewrite, again, that's definitely been a conversation within the planning department, is how can we improve that process to really capture the breadth of historic preservation within the city of Fargo, especially the core neighborhoods. So, but again, we're not there yet. That's a process that, we have yet to endeavor.
Well, I'm going to suggest that enforcement is going to be a very valuable tool in the future. I live in the Jefferson neighborhood. I live in a block that is within the historic overlay. And on the block face that I live on, there are 7 homes. And 5 of those are rentals, and 2 are individually owned. And so at some point in time, those rental property owners are going to have to do something. And based on their history of doing nothing to squeeze as much money as possible out of the property, I think that they're probably not going to try to do, something that's to our standard. So if they come in here and tell us one thing and we approve it, and then they go do something else, and it's on my block, I will see it. But then the question is, what are we going to do about it? We could probably take away their rental license if that was a thing, if rental license was a thing. But I don't think that's a thing in Fargo, is it? We don't have a rental license.
I would have to, I'm not sure.
So it's, not having a rental license in Fargo is kind of the same as me barbecuing in the backyard for my friends and family versus me starting a barbecue restaurant in my backyard. If I don't have to get a restaurant license, I can do whatever I want. And that's exactly what's happening on my block is we've got property owners that acquired property. They've been able to ratchet the rents up. They have not reinvested. They're in a historic overlay. Gutters are falling down. I have a house 2 doors to the north of mine that is historic, and they pulled a building permit to do some interior remodeling, and they discovered that they had to get down into the basement, so they tore the historic porch off the building a month ago. No permit. They didn't come before us and tell us that. And now there's a big hole in their yard. And yesterday there were 2 concrete mixers there pouring a foundation for a new porch that apparently they're just going to build, and by the time it's done, you might hear about it. But the enforcement is, if we don't have any teeth, if we don't have any ability to go back and hold people accountable for what they say that they were supposed to do, then that's a whole second issue that we need to address in the land development code. So, anyway, I don't have a motion. I just wanted to bring it to your attention so that you can think about it.
Thank you. I think some interesting comments and thoughts, and maybe one question in terms of the revised version of the land development code. Where are we at in that process? How far along is it?
Right now, we're still trying to get through the growth plan, and then once that's complete, that will kind of segue, from my understanding, into the to the land development code process.
Okay, thank you.
So what does that mean in terms of months or what are you talking about?
Years.
When's the?
So we're on kind of just starting the back half of the growth plan. And so we're kind of over that halfway point. And so I think it was about an 18-month or less process. And so hopefully in the next 6 to 9 months, or even less than that, we'll have a better idea of the kickoff for that and the timeline for that.
So 2 years.
I guess just as a sort of a general question, if there is a property that's, like you're saying, is being altered within a historic overlay, is there anything that we can do? Like, you said you've seen footings being poured for a new porch that you don't know what it's going to be. Is there?
I've talked to the contractor. They're intending they tore the old porch off. They're going to put a new porch on, and they're going to extend the roof line 5 feet. They're going to add a
That's
third
gonna be
floor.
hitting the sidewalk at that point.
And the initial building permit was for $25,000 for interior demolition. So there's mission creep happening here, and but no one seems to be aware of it.
Well, and I was just thinking, there's a house on 7th, I think fairly near yours, that they've added a whole 2-story addition on the back of the house, and I don't think that was brought forward to us. There's a house on 9th Avenue on the 300 block very near the river that had a fire, and they've added a 3rd floor as part of their reconstruction of the house, which wasn't originally there.
Yeah.
So, I mean, there are projects that are happening within these overlays that haven't come before us, and I'm wondering if there's really a course of action
I
with
think
that.
a couple of, it must go down to people who are reviewing this because, for instance, there was a review of an addition to a house right behind mine last summer, which was surprising because usually it's just if it's viewed from the street, right, then it goes through our review. But if it's usually in the middle of a block and it's to a back addition, it doesn't come for commission. I would say usually it hasn't. However, the house across the street from me had a larger addition, but that didn't come through the commission. So I think it might be just who's reviewing it, whether or not they actually pull it before the commission. Correct me if I'm wrong. But usually I think how it's written out is if the addition is viewed from a street, right? It could be on the side street or,
I thought it was anything that triggered an exterior building permit. Was
Because I
supposed to be
know,
flagged.
as far as garages go too, if it's an alley
They're not.
garage, it's come before.
it's an alley garage, yep. So maybe, go ahead, Megan.
Yep, I was just gonna say, so it really depends on the historical overlay. They're not exactly the same. Jefferson, for example, is very different than Island Park. Island Park is an older one, and over time, probably at least starting, at least from what I understand, a little over 10 years ago, where we've had, beginning with Chaz A. Roberts and then moving through kind of the more current ones, are a little bit more detailed or specific. When you get into the little older ones like Island Park, they're not quite as detailed or specific or have different review types. So the certificate of appropriateness, there's two of them. One is a staff review and one is your commission's review. And so depending on the scope of work might be why you might see some work happening that requires a permit that maybe didn't go forward to your commission. Scope creep, if you see something, certainly call Brad or I and we can look into it. That could be a situation where, typically in our inspections department, a single family permit, especially if it's interior, would never come to the planning department or typically doesn't. Where if there's changes and maybe the inspector sees it and doesn't realize it isn't a historic overlay, could be the situation. So if it's brought to Brad or my attention, we can look into that and see what is happening or what could be done or stop work if it needs to, those types of things. So I think there's probably a multitude of reasons why things are happening that maybe don't go before your commission. So staff, we're really looking forward to the land development code rewrite to really look at each of these overlays, check the differences, get some consistency, get a better process, look at the scope of the HPC. We're really excited to dig into that soon.
I do know in the past, there have been projects that maybe there hasn't been a permit pulled and someone has discovered this and brought to attention. And we've done stop holds before where the city's come in and actually stopped and then the owner had to come and go through the review. So maybe that would be my recommendation. Okay, lots of discussion here today. Any other comments?
In line with this discussion, I would be interested to know to what extent the growth plan addresses the historic neighborhoods of Fargo. So if perhaps at the next meeting, if you could let us know that briefly, that would be really helpful. I know that the growth plan is really concentrating on the outside edges of Fargo, but growth will eventually happen everywhere in Fargo. And so I would be interested to know how the plan intends to address historic neighborhoods.
One quick note on that. Thanks for bringing that up, Commissioner. What we will do is send some information out. Hopefully you've been or seen information on the growth plan, and this is really for all of Fargo. So it's not just the edges, but it's for within city limits as well. And so the growth plan is really hopefully setting that stage and setting that vision. And then again, the land development code rewrite will be kind of that one step closer or zoomed in a little bit deeper. But after this meeting, we'll send out information to your commission for your review and then bring an update at the next meeting as well.
Thank you, Megan.
Move to adjourn.
Is there a second? Okay. So our next meeting is September 19th, 2023. And with that, the meeting is adjourned. Thank you, everyone.